Will. But we have been talking a lot about Donald Trump and really about the election generally. And one of the things that has been weird little, it's this little thing that just sticks in the back of my head is the way we talk about his felony convictions. And I've used the phrase he is a convicted felon as a way of communicating that in and of itself is a problem. And the reason that that's a little bit of a wrinkle for me is because I also believe that once you have served your time, you have served your time and you should be fully brought back into society. Now, admittedly, ain't served no time. That one hasn't. But this conversation around how we talk about police reform and criminal legal system reform and folks who are returning citizens, it needs more nuance. And so I'm grateful that our guest today is back with us on the show to help us make a lot more intelligent sense about this factor that a lot of us have been using as a way of indicating that Donald Trump is wholly inappropriate for this position. There's so many reasons why he's totally inappropriate. I query whether we're discussing his felony conviction in a way that gives life to other formerly convicted folks. So joining me right now is Desmond Meade. As I mentioned earlier in the show, a formerly homeless returning citizen, overcame a ton of obstacles, eventually became the president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, the chair of Floridians for a Fair Democracy. The brother is doing it, and he was one of the leading voices behind Amendment 4, which was a grassroots citizens initiative that restored voting rights to over 1.4 million Floridians with past felony convictions. Desmond Meade, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome back.
Lurie, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm grateful to your wisdom in this space. I don't know if you have any reactions to some of the comments I was just making. I have used the phrase 34 times convicted felon, and afterwards I'm like, maybe I shouldn't say that part because I feel like we got to say it, but I don't feel like we're saying it in a way that does justice to the many members of our community who themselves are dealing with past felony convictions. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I really do appreciate what you said. I mean, and I came from a very thoughtful place. As you was talking, I was even when you was introducing me and saying who I was and my organization. The other thing that was going into my head was that I was also one of Time Magazine 100 most influential in the world. I was also a MacArthur Genius, and my organization was also last year nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, right? And
Wow.
so, yeah, and so in spite of all those accomplishments, there's still a struggle about how people refer to me, right? And so now that you see the conviction of former President Donald Trump, right? You said, man, even the former president can't escape that scarlet letter of shame or that scarlet word of shame when you talk about felon. And so you are right, because what we've been saying is that in spite of the mistakes that we've made in the past, we're still a human being, right? We're still someone's father, mother, sister, brother, right? Now, whether or not you may agree with a person's policies, right? They're still first a human being. And what we have been fighting for so long is to give us some type of dignity. Somehow or another, through your words or your phrases, you should be able to recognize our humanity. And that's why we see the terms such as justice impacted people, or even like returning citizens, right? Because we're people first. And so I really did appreciate just hearing you say that because not too many people do. I've heard the president a talk. I remember during the debate when he used that word. Let me tell you something, Lurie. I felt the venom in that word when he said it, and it was almost like he was attacking me, right? And to think that was that's the president of the United States that supposedly believes in second chances and redemption and all of that. You know what it reminded me of? And not to be controversial, but it reminded me of that white friend that you got that you were cool with, and then one day another black person pissed them off, and they used the N word, right? And then now you got to look at them sideways because, like, wow, I didn't know that was in you, right? And that's how I felt at the debate. It was like totally a step backwards. I was very hopeful when we seen the conviction because I thought there was so many positive things that could come out of that, right? And I thought the number one thing was now that you have a prominent person on the right that have experienced the criminal justice system and have now gotten a felony conviction, and there was some discussion about even whether or not he could even run for office or be president of the United States, that would force a more holistic conversation, right? A more wholesome conversation around criminal justice reform, around reentry, around even just people with felony convictions having the right to vote. You remember when he was during the primary, you had some candidates that raised their hands and said they would support someone with a felony conviction running for president of the United States. But some of those people, my own governor, Ron DeSantis, he lives in a state where he actually put obstacles in front of people who have felony convictions who just want to vote, not be president of the United States. We just want to be a part of democracy. And then you go down.
So here's where some of the questions for me arise, because and this is where I had to think a little bit about this one, because it's a weird little nugget for me. I believe in fighting for the rights of returning citizens. I think that's an important thing for us to do, and I want to be clear that I want to be mindful that my language in this particular political moment is not also going to be in a space that could undermine my ability to also advocate on behalf of returning citizens. And because of it's not that Black people are more criminal, but we have a disproportionate amount of policing in our community. It's a racist policing paradigm. So a disproportionate amount of us are spending time in incarcerated spaces, whether we're guilty or not. For me, is not the issue, because when you look at the race, if you look at crimes done by one race as opposed to another, we're going to end up in jail way more than our white counterparts are. So for me, I don't care whether you're innocent or guilty at that point. And so I want us to be mindful of it. And then there's the complicating factor of, I'm not sure how to talk about the fact that he is a convicted felon or I guess I can't even call him a returning citizen. He never went away. He just has this conviction, which he may not actually end up even spending any time for if the Supreme Court has its way. How do we talk about the fact that his felony conviction is related to this sort of willful betrayal of the American public, of the governing system, this whole espionage case with these documents, and distinguish that in a way, as opposed to someone like yourself, who we could have started your bio with MacArthur Genius and Nobel Prize? And how do we balance those things? Because the idea of a felon, someone who has a felony conviction, and y'all hear me making a correction in real time because I'm trying to avoid saying a felon versus a person with a felony conviction. As our guest said, we are people first. What we have been through is just a descriptor. But how do we talk about someone with this particular type of felony conviction, which in the minds of many, myself included, means you are incapable of being an effective president, not because you have a felony, but because your felony was for espionage and trying to sell the secrets of America, allegedly, reportedly, supposedly. How do we strike a balance between those two things?
Well, so here's the thing. I don't know, and I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't see a conviction for espionage yet, right?
Well, I'm talking about the case that he was. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? No, you are correct. I'm sorry. His conviction. I'm thinking about the case that Eileen Cannon talked about in Florida. He's still facing charges for that. Yeah, right. He was convicted for the lying on the documents and the election fraud in New York. It's so many crimes, Desmond Meade. It's so many.
How many of us tell lies, right? Have told a lie, right? And I always tell people, no one is forced to walk around saying, "Oh, I'm a former liar," or "I'm a former cheater," or whatever. But we're made to walk around even 30 years after, right? We made our mistake. We still got to wear that scarlet letter of shame. At the end of the day, that word needs to go. I'm wearing a shirt right now that says F the F word, right? Because I should not be defined by my mistake that I made. Right. And so
how do we make this argument for a person who's so unsympathetic as the former president?
Well, then
it's an easy argument to understand when it comes to the average brother or sister on the street. But as opposed this particular person for these particular crimes, how do we make that argument in a way that the community will take seriously in light of the risks that come with someone like him assuming office again?
Well, so here's the thing, right? And it just might even backfire, right? Okay. What I think is that point blank, if you've got to even go that way to make that argument, that's so that you grasp them at straws now, right? That you might not be in a good position, because when you stop and think about it, where are we as a country, right? To where that's the thing that we've got to resort to. If he is unqualified, or you feel someone is unqualified, you felt that way before the conviction. So you should not even have to use the conviction, right, to talk about why folks maybe should go the other way, right? At the end of the day, when you do that, we cannot just say, "Oh, okay, well, we need to be sympathetic to people with felony convictions who look like us or think like us," because how are we really coming across? Like when I led the effort for Amendment 4, right, for voting to restore voting rights to people who have been previously convicted of a felony conviction, I often said that we were fighting just as hard for that person that wanted to vote for Donald Trump as we were for that person that wished they could have voted for President Barack Obama, because we were fighting to expand democracy to everyone. Right? If you're talking about a true democracy, then you don't limit your empathy, you don't limit your advocacy to only people who look like you or may think the way you think. That's not what the democracy is all about. And so even as we approach engage in the conversation around criminal justice reform, yes, we always remember the fact that, yeah, we have communities that are disproportionately impacted, that are disproportionately policed, but does that minimize whatever trauma a person who may not be in that community feel? Does that minimize a person who may not have the same skin color mine? Because if I'm telling them that, if I'm saying I only care about what's happening to Black people because it's disproportionately impacting Black people, then that person who do not look like me cannot take me seriously and think that I care about them. Right. And I don't think that is the message.
Let me give out the number. Let me give out the number real quick. 866-801-8255, 866-801-TALK. And so for you, this is a self-defeating line of argument. It's a self-defeating line of inquiry when there are so many other things that we could be talking about.
Because guess what? You might inadvertently create a bond. Because to call it saying that somebody is convicted of a felony, so a whole lot of people can relate to that. And then hearing the rhetoric about, oh, this is a political prosecution or getting railroaded or whatever, there's a whole lot of people in our community that can relate to that. You know, one of the things that I look at, even back when President Trump first ran for office against Hillary Clinton, there were people in our community that was talking about, shoot, I kind of like that guy. He keeping it real. You know, even though
we had a caller earlier who said that he was planning to vote for Trump until he watched the RNC. And I asked him, what policies did Donald Trump have for you that made you want to vote for him before you watched the RNC convention? And he said he didn't really have any policies. He basically just liked his swagger. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he was saying.
I mean, that might not be the best way to actually make a decision about who you want to run the country. But you know what? People make vote and make choices for various reasons. They're not going to be the same reasons that we vote for, but we got to respect, hey, that's how you want to approach it. That's on you. And so what people were seeing in that first election was he was a break from the norm, from the politician rhetoric, right? That's what they thought, right? Even when you fast forward to his second attempt to be reelected, the first attempt of reelection, what we seen was Super Bowl. I never forget that, right? The Super Bowl ad, right, where he had billions of people watching, right? And he spent millions of dollars for this 30-second ad. He didn't talk about immigration. He didn't talk about the economy. You know what he did? He put an African American woman on that screen and then talk about Second Chance Act and criminal justice reform, right? Wow. And when you looked at the high-profile people that he pardoned, right, there's a method to that madness, right? And so
you're saying something, Desmond. You are saying something right now. And I think we gotta sit in this. I know I'm seeing the comments. People are uncomfortable with this, but the reality is there are a number of people in the community who do relate to that. Not that they're more likely to be a Trump voter because they have that in common, but if we're not careful about our language, what I'm hearing you say is we may end up alienating people unnecessarily who might otherwise be in alignment with us simply because of the callousness with which we are talking about this topic.
Here's the added piece. And it is especially so when the other side does not address those very same issues. When the other side is not specifically even addressing, like, for instance, the impact of the 94 crime bill and what President Biden, the role he played in it. And people say, oh, he talked to the NAACP. But guess what? These days, the NAACP is no longer the monolithic voice of African Americans. These days, the NAACP is not the voice of people who've been impacted by this justice system. And he could talk to
That
the
is a
NAACP all he
statement,
wants,
Desmond Meade.
but he
That
has
is
to.
quite a statement. Well, can
But
you
but
unpack that a
it's
little
the
bit? Because right
reality
now
of
the
it.
NAACP is in their whole convention. I know some of them listening right now. Can you unpack that a little bit? Because I want to make sure we're not giving short shrift. Because I know this is a challenge for some folks to hear what you're saying. So I want to make sure we're not glossing over it. Can you tease that out just a little bit more?
All right, let me tease it out a little bit more. First of all, we don't have just one type of leader in our community.
That's right.
Right? We don't have one way of thinking in our community. Think about it. For so long, how many people, how many ethnicities can you look at and automatically assume how they vote? You cannot look at a Latinx. You cannot look at Asian Pacifica. You can't look at a white person. You
Well,
can't look at any other race of people
I
and
question that.
automatically think that's how they vote. We as African Americans are more assumed to be more monolithic than any other ethnicity. And the reality is that we have diversity just like everybody else. That means that we also have diverse leaders. Our leaders don't always agree on the same thing, right? There are different variations of leadership here. And so to think that just one organization could be the only voice for African Americans or the only voice, and I'm speaking specifically towards directly impacted people, is a misjudgment of where we're at right now in our society. We have organizations across this country in almost every state, and we have national organizations of formerly incarcerated people, right? That when they came together, every candidate that ran for office on the Democrat side came and had a conversation with them, with the exception of President Joe Biden, right? From the vice president on down, had a conversation and met with him in Philadelphia at a museum that used to be a prison. And so I know that folks up high understand that directly impacted people do have their own voice. We're no longer that group of people that need anyone to speak on our behalf. We can address our issues and we could say what we want. We've met with presidents in other administrations to talk about our issues. And therefore, we deserve the respect of being addressed directly. Now,
so
I think
you've made a lot. These are good. I hear the advocacy. I understand what you're saying. And I will say when I have to address the 94 crime bill because that comes up a lot. We always remind people that was a crime bill. That was not something that Joe Biden concocted. It was something that he shepherded through at the request of the majority of the CBC. We've talked about some of the complicating nature of that legislation, the fact that it also included the Violence Against Women Act, which made more Democrats vote for it than they otherwise might have. We know it was controversial. We know Black people wasn't demanding more police. We wanted safety in our communities. But we also do know that Joe Biden has spoken to, I won't say he's addressed, but he has spoken to his role in the 94 crime bill and has now since taken steps at the federal level to shift some of the remaining outcomes that we're still experiencing. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it's 100%, but I do want to make sure that we have a full understanding of what's happening.
But Lurie,
and so I just, hold on one second.
Satisfaction.
I addressed that to the audience. That has to go out to because I got to make sure that the audience doesn't just leave thinking the 94 crime bill was just Joe Biden, because we've done a lot of work for people to understand the complexities around that 94 crime bill. So if I'm hearing you correctly, we need to be mindful of this language, this felony conviction language, because there are a lot of folks out there right now who are saying Trump got convicted. He's more appealable to Black people. He's selling sneakers. He's more appealable to Black people. And a lot of us have said absolutely not. But what you, I think, are saying is when we buy into this language that paints with a very broad brush the complete inability of someone who has a felony conviction to be considered qualified simply because of the felony conviction, that is a bridge too far, and it is a self-defeating one because it's not necessary, and it might actually serve to alienate people who might not have had any other connection with Donald Trump except that in a way that would be defeatist at the polling booth. Am I restating what you said?
I agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that.
Okay. That's an important point. And I'm going to have to charge myself. I have used that language.
I want to make the record clear. I never said that Joe Biden was the author of the 94 crime bill.
Right.
But what I can say is that he was complicit in it. And let me tell you, one of the standards that's applied to people like me when we have been convicted, right? Part of our so-called rehabilitation or reentry into society is to accept responsibility for our actions, and in some cases even display some type of remorse right, in order to be wholeheartedly forgiven, right?
Yeah.
And so some of that is, okay, I understand he may have spoke to it, but at the end of the day, all I'm saying is that when you're throwing darts, when you're pointing fingers at a person, what they say, it's always three pointing right back at you. And so I think it's vitally important, right, for President Biden and his administration to really address this. I think it's vitally important for advocates to really address the issues and not just wash over them, not just bury our heads in the sand and say, oh no, we just got to coalesce to get rid of somebody or to prevent somebody else, right? When we don't do that, when we don't address the issue at hand, when we don't accept responsibility and then even embrace even our weaknesses or our faults, right? When we don't do that, we run the risk of alienating even more people because they do not see the genuineness in our conversation.
I think this is an important point. I think, and this to me feels like an easy course correction. This is not one of those things that is going to take a policy position statement and a whole committee to go on. We can stop using the language. I'm like, this one we might be able to do easily. Although I am getting some pushback to your comment about you can't look at other groups and tell who they voted for. Some of the commenters are saying white people have voted for Republican for the past 60 years, and all the other groups are most likely to vote Democrat. So even though we don't paint it with the same brush,
let me push back on that. If white people were voting for Republicans, right? If white people are voting for Republicans, then we will always have Republicans, right? Let's be real. Black African Americans
that's a factual point. White people have not voted. The majority of white people have not voted for the Democrats since LBJ.
Okay, you can look at what I'm saying is, but let's be real. We cannot look at a white person and tell if they're Democrat or Republican for the most part, unless they just totally dressed up in a way that lets you think, oh my God, yeah, that guy is definitely maybe a MAGA voter. But let's be very realistic, because let me tell you something. Even when you look at the administration, when you look at the agencies or whatever, what are we seeing? We understand that at the end of the day, we are but a small minority. And guess what? The majority of folks are going to be white. And not every white person is voting conservative.
No, that's true. But the majority of registered white voters are voting for the Republican Party, and the majority of white people have not voted for the Democrats or any other party since the days of LBJ. The majority of Black voters, Latino voters, Asian voters have been voting Democrat since we got access to the vote. And I do tend to look at white people and default assume that they are going to vote Republican, even if they're nice. It's particularly white women. I default to that presumption because the voting pattern suggests it. And I'm a student of Derek Bell's interest convergence theory, which tells us that white people are only going to support the expansion of Black rights, which is something the Democrats have been a part of, up until the point that it benefits white people. At the point that they no longer perceive that expansion of Black rights working in their benefit, they will no longer vote in that way. And so for me, by default, even though I'm not 100%, I get it wrong sometimes, but I feel like if I were playing the lotto, I'm betting on white people voting for Republicans, which is why cross-racial coalitions, including the white folks, the minority of white folks who won't, the minority of white folks who are willing to vote for the progressive movements and progressive parties, that's why coalition politics, what Reverend Dr. William Barber is talking about, what the Moral Mondays movement is talking about, what fusion politics, what Professor Ian Haney Lopez talks about, that's why coalition under the Democratic tenet is so important, because we don't have the numbers in and of ourselves. But we've reached the end of our, God dang it, I thought we had more time. Any final comments on how we can proactively shift our language in more in ways that won't alienate this portion of our community that has a real dog in this fight?
We're talking about somebody like they're your mama, like you're talking about your mom, right? Would you address your mother that way? Would you address your sister, your brother, a loved one that way? Because listen, if we're not able to exude love, then how can we even demand or expect to receive it ourselves, right? At the end of the day, I think that no matter if a person disagrees with us, right, they're still a human being. And a matter of fact, let me get a little deeper. They're still a child of God, right? And they deserve.
Ooh, that's a bridge too far for some people. Oh,
guess what? It's a bridge.
I just felt the whole audience go, "Oh, come on! He ain't a child. He is technically. If y'all believe in the God that you say you believe in, he is technically a child."
Listen, let me tell you. And what that God say is, don't come to me with that weak love. It's easy to love somebody that makes you feel good or confers a benefit to you. But the love that they talk about in their Bible is that love that you can have for someone, even when you know they don't like you, even when you know they hate you, even when you know that they want to kill you. Because if you're talking about you a Christian, Christ exuded that same love to the very same people that wanted to crucify him.
We
right?
got to leave it
That's
there,
that love.
Desmond. We have literally 60 seconds left. This is one of the days where I wish I did have a longer show because I know the phone lines have lit up. People got comments. They want to talk about it. We'll talk about this conversation tomorrow, folks. Desmond, Meade, before the man cuts us off, because they will cut us off to pay these bills, what's the best way for people to follow your organization and to connect with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. We're at www.floridarrc.com. And we're on all social media with the handle of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition.